Hello everyone, welcome to another 5 ways in 5 days video here at the Simon Says Stamp YouTube channel. My name is Kristina Werner and today I'm going to be showing you 5 different ways to make uniquely shaped cards. The first 3 of these are going to be fairly simple ideas. So my plan is to use this colorful cardstock here to show you how to make those different types of card bases. I'll also throw in some examples of finished cards that I have created over the years using those particular shaped card ideas. And then the final 2 ideas are very unique. In fact, they use dies from the Simon Says Stamp die line. And I'll be showing you how to create those 2 types of cards from start to finish. So the beginning of this video, I'm just going to be going over some basics and showing examples. And then for the second half of the video, I will be showing you, step by step through all of those cards. So like I said, we're going to start out with some of the basics. Now, a regular card, like an A2 card or an A7 card, are rectangular. But one of the best things you can do to kind of switch it up, and it's one of the most simple things you can do, is to make your card square. I'm going to take this burnt orange color of cardstock, and we're going to cut it down in 2 different ways to make a square card. One of the easiest ways to make a square card is to take a regular A2 card. It's already been folded. And then just take a little bit off one side to make sure that it's measured correctly to a square. So if you have mastered an A2 card, which is basically a finished folded size that is 1/4 of a letter piece of cardstock. So if this is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 tall. If you've mastered this, which most card makers do after they've been making cards for a little bit of time, you can make a square card just by making the measurement that's down this side the same as the measurement that's up here. So this one is 4 1/4. So now I'm going to take this and cut it. I'm going to bring my measurement down, my trimmer down here so you can see it. I'm going to cut it at 4 1/4. Now, if you notice, when I folded my card, it's not exactly perfect. So this is an opportunity to make it perfect. So instead of going straight to 4 1/4, I'm going to just take a little off one side. And then I'm going to flip it over. And now I'm going to make it 4 1/4. And we're left with a perfectly square card. Now you do sacrifice some little bits of cardstock, these little pieces that came off right here. But you can save those to add as borders on your card or to test out ink colors. You don't have to throw these scraps away. The other way that you can make a square card and probably preserve a little bit more of your cardstock is to do a little bit of measuring beforehand and kind of map out in your head how you want your square card to be. So I've got a post-it note right here. Just off to the side here, I'm going to use a marker and figure this out. Okay, so if we were going to make this exact square card, I'm going to draw it as 2 squares. So those are the 2 sides of the card as if it's folded open like this. This edge should be 4 1/4. Just like that. And this edge right here is basically 4 1/4 and 4 1/4. So if we add those 2 together, we get 8 1/2. All right, so now let's go back to our cardstock here. Now, the way I cut this is already 8 1/2. Convenient. So I'm going to just cut this right here down the other side at 4 1/4. And then all I have to do is fold my card. So now I can fold my card right in half. And we're left with this longer strip of cardstock. Now, if you wanted to create a larger square card, you can. You could use the same method that I used here. Okay, let's say we want a 5 1/2 by 5 1/2 inch card. All right, so 5 1/2 by 5 1/2. We know this side is 5 1/2, and up here it's 5 1/2 plus 5 1/2. Okay, so 5 and 5 is 10. Half and half is one more. So this up here is 11 inches. So in this case, for a 5.5 by 5.5 inch card, I would just cut some cardstock to 11 inches by 5.5 and then fold it in half, and I'd have a perfectly square card. Square cards are very easy to create once you kind of have an idea. So now on screen, I'm going to show you a few square cards that I have created over the years. These are just some examples of different ways to use a square card base. In some cases for these cards, I started out with a regular rectangular sized card, and then the design sort of led me to lop off one end and make it more square. That's one of the ways that a lot of my cards end up being square in the first place. Now you might be wondering, I have this square card and I don't have a square envelope to send it in. You have a couple options for mailing or giving a square card away. The first one is to actually make a square envelope or buy a square envelope. You can definitely do that. One of my favorite ways to do it is to just use a regular envelope but slip a piece of cardstock inside. Here I have a soft navy envelope from Simon. And if I was to put this little 4.25 by 4.25 card in my envelope and I close it up, this part right here would most likely be bent in the mail. So to prevent that, I generally start with the square card in the center of the envelope, and then I just slide a scrap piece of cardstock right behind the card and then close it up. And that gives it more stability on those edges where there isn't any of the card. I've also seen card makers use backs of cereal boxes that they cut for the envelope. They put that in to help make the envelope more sturdy. You could use any of the junk mail that you get at your house. You could cut those heavier cardstock postcards down to the size you need for your card. Now, this method of mailing a smaller card in a larger envelope is going to come into play when we talk about some other shapes of cards. So remember this technique. If you ever have a card that is smaller than your envelope that you have on hand, go ahead and just use it and put a scrap piece of cardstock inside that is the right size for the envelope, and it will stabilize everything and you can mail your card without having to have a special envelope. The next shaped card idea I'm going to share with you is circular cards. You can even do oval cards in this category. Now, I have two different ways that I make circular cards. I like both. I've used both in the past. I'm going to show you quickly how to do that right now. The first way is I start with a whole sheet of cardstock, and I'm going to score it in half and fold it down. I'm going to score it just to make sure that the fold looks really nice, but you don't have to score it. And since I'm using my little score buddy here that's a little bit smaller, see how it hangs off the edge here, I'm going to score this at 5.5, which is perfectly half of this 11-inch cardstock here. I'll score it once, and then I'm just going to rotate it and score it at 5.5 again. And since it's perfectly 11 inches, I now have a score line that's directly in the center of the cardstock. So I'll go ahead and fold that down. And then you're going to need some circle dies. Now, if you have a different circle cutting method, you can do something that's very similar. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to be using the Simon Says Stamp nested circle dies. And I happen to have some envelopes that are, I think they're 5.5 by 5.5. So I'm going to pick out one of these circles that will fit in one of those envelopes. Looks like this one right here using the measurement on my map. It's about 4 3/4. So I'm going to take my circle die, and I want to preserve some of this cardstock so I can use it later. So I'm going to bring it to the side here. And when I place my die over this cardstock, remember the fold is up here at the top, I'm going to have the die hanging off the fold. So it's going to cut the circles and the circle shape for my card, but it's going to preserve the fold. So I'm going to get a couple pieces of tape here that I can use. And I'm just going to tape that in place. I like to do it where most of the tape is outside just in case any of the sticky residue stays on the cardstock. And then I'll run it through my die cutting machine. Okay, this is what I'm left with. I can pop this right out. And here I have my circle card base. It's just got a little bit of a little knot shaken out at the top. And I can fold it open and closed. Perfect. All right, I've got this extra cardstock left, so I'm going to use it to create another circle card. This is going to be the second way to create a circle card, and that's basically starting out by cutting 2 perfect circles. I've picked a smaller circle. This one is about 3 3/4. So now I have 2 perfectly cut circles. I'm going to take one of these circles and add a score line so that it can create the fold. So I'm using my score buddy again, just putting that circle right in there. And I'm going to do a score line where I have enough room for adhesive. So I'm actually, I would do it right here, but that's going to leave a very small area. So I'm just going to slide this over a little bit and hold that cardstock in place while I score right here. So now I have this little kind of tab that I can fold back. And that's going to create the back of my card. I'm not going to take a really strong adhesive. I'm using a dot runner from Simon Says Stamp. You could also use red line tape or anything like that. And I'm going to put the plain circle right on top. Make sure I press that down really well. And then now I can open and close my circular card. So that's a way to get a circle card base, but have like perfectly circle without having this little notch at the top. The other way you can do that is to create your card base like this and put another circle on top that is just cut so that it disguises that fold up there at the top. Generally, I don't think people really notice a little bit at the top. And it does help you when you're creating your card because it gives you a reference for how to keep your card straight, so it's up and down like this. So here are some examples of circle cards that I've made over the years. I love circle cards. I make holiday cards. I make Valentine's Day cards, thank you cards. Just about anything is great as a circle card. And remember, when you're mailing circle cards, you can use the same method that I showed for the square cards earlier. You can put the circle card inside a regular envelope and then slide a secondary piece of cardstock inside to stabilize the envelope and the card inside. That's a great way to mail circular cards, and I do that quite often. For my third shaped card idea for you guys today, I thought I would share with you how you could create a shaped card using some larger dies. This is great for any of your nested die sets because you're going to have, progressively larger dies to work with. So I thought I'd show you some really quick card base ideas on how to cut a heart-shaped card and also this tag-shaped card, which technically could still be a tag and attached to a gift, but it opens up as a card. So both of these are going to use a very similar technique as I showed for the circle cards. It's a lot of the same idea. Starting by scoring and folding my cardstock so that I have a nice fold to work with. And then I'm taking one of the heart dies in Simon's Nested Heart die set. So I've got my cardstock folded here. I'm going to take my heart die, and you have a couple options when you have a heart specifically. You could have it open on the side, so we'd have the fold just right here, or you can have it on the top of the heart. And there will be 2 instances for the card fold, whatever you'd like to do. I think I'm going to have mine be kind of the bottom side of the card. So I'll just tape these in place with some Easy C tape, and then run that through my die cutting machine. All right, here's my card base. And it looks like a perfect heart and opens just like that. And once again, you could have had the die hanging off the edge here, and you'd have the folds at the top and it would open up. For the nested tags die, I've cut the largest die out of some green cardstock twice. And I'm going to do that same technique that I did with the circle card and just add a score line onto one of these tags, and then that makes it into a card. So because I want this area to kind of write a message to my recipient, I'm going to have my score line be just right up here at the top, about 1 inch in. All right. Now there are a couple options for this. You can adhere this one on the back and the card would flip open like this, or you can adhere it to the back and the whole front would open like this. I think I want it like this so that this could possibly be lifted a little bit and it gives the recipient kind of the clue that you should open it up the rest of the way. So I'm going to add adhesive. You can see where that score line is. Let's go ahead and just fold that so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to go ahead and add some dot runner adhesive, kind of avoiding the hole, and then I can line these up and press those together at the top. And then now I have a tag card. So I would add a ribbon up here, stamp on this, and then write a message to the recipient inside. Another way that you could use this die is you could have a fold already in your cardstock and have this edge just kind of hang off the side a little bit. And then your card would open like a book like this, something like that. The next card idea is a box card. Now I'm using the box card dies from Simon Says Stamp to create this card. And it cuts everything you need except the very back panel of the card. And I'll talk about that when we get there. For now, I've cut out the very, very long strip out of some white cardstock, and I'm going to be doing some ink blending on it. I've got some Distress Oxide ink colors, and I'm starting with Seedless Preserves, and I'm going to blend this down onto this long strip of white cardstock, and then I'm going to be adding some Chip Sapphire coming from the other end, and then darkening it up with a little bit of black soot. Now, while I'm doing that blending, I thought I would talk to you a little bit about three-dimensional or specialty folded cards. I'm showing 2 of them in today's video. Like I mentioned earlier, this first one is the box card. It's a very basic idea for a card, and it's very adaptable to lots of different types of cards. And you can even change how this card is put together to make it your own. The thing that's really fun about this particular card is that you can have elements that kind of pop out a little bit without having to add any complicated pop-up folds or any little mechanisms that do that. And we'll get to that in a minute here and you'll be able to see what I do. But for now, I've just finished that front panel and now we're going to work on the back wall of the card. Now this is a portion that is not cut by the dies because it's a basic rectangle that you can cut yourself, but it's basically 3.5 by 4 1/4 if you want it to be the full height of an A2 card. Mine's a little bit shorter than that because I just wanted it to be a little bit more squatty. I wanted to be a little shorter, but that's the basic measurement that you need for the back panel of this box card. I'm doing the same blending that I did on my kind of front panel, that long strip. I'm using Seedless Preserves, Chip Sapphire, and a little bit of black soot, and you can see how those 2 match and go together really well. I'm now going to dry this panel here the best that I can because I'm going to be doing some heat embossing on top. And as you know, embossing powder sticks to any ink that is not completely dry. So I dried it with my heat tool and tested it with my embossing powder before I moved on. I'm using the Magical to Me stamp set from Simon, and I'm going to use the really large Magical from the stamp set for the main focal point on my card for the big area of the greeting. And since I'm doing heat embossing, I am going to use an anti-static powder tool. I'm using the Cottontail from Rabbit Hole Designs for that, putting a little bit of powder down onto that surface, and then inking up my stamp with the Versamark ink. I'll stamp that down onto my inked panel, and then I'm going to be applying some white embossing powder. The embossing powder that I'm using today is Alabaster from Brutus Monroe, and I'll tap off the excess and make sure I get off all that extra powder, and then hit that with my heat tool until everything's smooth and melted. I used the stars from the stamp set, and I nestled those all around the greeting, and I had a few more stars on the side panels, and I stamped those in some more Versamark, pressed them down onto the panel, and then I switched up my embossing powders. I'm now using some clear embossing powder from Ranger, and that's going to give me a really cool glossy texture on these stars, but let the ink color show through. I did the same exact thing on my back panel for this card. I used those stars from the stamp set, stamped them in Versamark, and once again used some clear embossing powder. I really love this clear embossing powder on blended backgrounds because you still see the color underneath. So after I had that panel all finished, it got really inky on the back, and this is a portion of the card that will be exposed. So I decided to put white cardstock on the back of this panel so that I would have a spot to write a greeting to the recipient. So I just used some dot runner to adhere that white cardstock directly onto my inked panel, and then I trimmed off the excess with a craft knife and a ruler. Okay, so now we're going to start sort of putting this card together. And I'm first bending back those tabs that are on my blended panel. And now I can sort of start to see how this is going to be put together. Taken the smaller die from the box card die set, and I've cut out 3 little interior panels for my box card out of some soft navy cardstock from Simon. And before I start assembling anything, I'm going to be adding my adhesive to all of these panels. I'm using some, I think it's 1/8 inch red line tape from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm folding back all the tabs and then applying this red line tape right on top. And this is going to make it so my assembly of this card goes by very smoothly and quickly. So the first thing I'm going to do is adhere one side of this smaller panel, and it's just going to go wrapped around the back of the card. Now you could actually adhere it on the inside if you'd like, but I decided to just have it be on the back. It was a little bit easier to handle doing it this way. So it's just wrapped around on that one side, and I'm going to be adhering those interior panels while it's still half assembled like this, just so I can get those panels in there a little bit easier. So I'm going to take one side and take off the backing on my red line tape, and then I can just kind of place it directly on this panel. I'm sort of envisioning where I want it, and then I can line it up on the top and bottom and press down that tab. You can see how it folds back and it's just perfectly placed. So now I'm going to take the other panels and do the same exact thing, spacing them out with a little bit of a gap in between. This is going to be a very similar technique to what I show you on my 5th card idea for today. So take note of how this is put together when it's half open and then you're adhering the interior panels. Okay, so now you can sort of see how the box card is coming together. So I'm going to kind of fold it flat for this next step. This ensures that it's going to be able to fold flat to go into an envelope. I'll fold back those tabs, peel off the release paper on the red line tape, and then all I have to do is fold back the other side of the card and press down, and it will adhere to the side that it needs to. So I'll just fold this down and press hard, and now I have them adhere to the other side of my card. The last thing to do is to take the adhesive off the tab that's on my inked panel, and I can press it down directly on the back panel. Now my back panel, it turns out, was cut just a little bit too wide, so I did take it to my paper trimmer and trim off just a tiny sliver of that cardstock, just so that it would fold flat a little bit better. So I trimmed that down, and then now I can take off the backing on that red line tape and then just fold it back over the back of the card. Okay, so the basic assembly of the card is finished, And now I'm going to decorate it with some of those kind of pop-up elements I was talking about earlier. I have some acetate here from Simon, and I'm cutting it into very narrow strips. I'm going to have these strips kind of popping out from the inside of the box with stars on the ends. So I'll just cut a bunch of these strips, and then I'm going to assemble them all at the same time. So I have all these strips off to the side, and I'm going to be adding these stars right on top. Now these stars were cut using a die from Simon Says Stamp. It will be listed down below in the video description with all of the supplies that I've used today. And it's also listed in the supplies at the blog post over at simonsaystampblog.com. I'm using some honeybee precision glue just to glue a bunch of these stars onto these strips of acetate. And I'm also using a Marvy jewel picker to pick up these stars because it's just a little bit easier to pick them up this way. So I'm adhering them on. And then now I'm going to place one of the acetate strips kind of into the card and kind of see where I want it placed, making a note of it. And then I'm taking that same glue and applying it onto that acetate strip and then placing it back into the card. Now it's going to hang out the bottom, but we'll be trimming those off here in a minute. This is just to get the correct placement for where I want these stars. So I want some that are on the first panel, some that are on the second or third. I want them spaced out so there's a little bit of depth to all of the stars. And I'm also varying the height of where the star appears. I'm making clusters of stars and like they're just popping out in celebration. And I'm just using my fingers to hold the acetate to those panels until it dries enough that it can just hold there on its own until it's completely dry. So I'm going to fold this flat so that I can trim off the excess acetate on the very bottom. So I'm just holding it flat and I'm going to take my scissors and lop off all the extra acetate hanging out the bottom of the card. The last thing I'm going to do is show you how this fits into a regular envelope. So when I mail this card, because there are some elements that won't be as sturdy, I probably would suggest using a piece of cardstock just to stabilize it. And then you can put it right into an envelope. Now you notice that one of my stars is hanging out the top a little bit. That is something to consider. So if I was to be sending this card today, I would probably cut down that strip and move it just a little bit so that I could fold the flap of the envelope down. So that is the basic box card. It's a fun, different way to create a card. So I'm going to move on and show you the last example for today, which is the basic box card. And I'm using the basic box card die set plus some specialty panels that go inside. So the basic box card set is this large die for the outer area of the box card, and then you've got some frames that will go inside. And then currently we have two different panel sets for the inside of your box cards. There's clouds and hearts. And then just released a few weeks ago is the Love You So Much basic box greeting. And it is sized perfectly to go on one of these box cards, basic box cards. So I'm going to be using that today as well. So I'm going to show you an example of a finished basic box card. It comes straight out of an envelope, just like this. And you pull it out and then it pops up and you have these kind of in-depth panels inside, and it looks really, really cool. It's very three-dimensional and it can stand up on a mantle or anything like that. So this is an example of how the card looks assembled. And I like to see an example of it so I can kind of think ahead and pick out different types of cardstock or paper to go on the inside for those specialty panels. So here's another example. I'm using a lot of the same elements for this one. And this helps me plan out my card. So for the card I'm going to be showing you today, I'm using some pattern paper from Lawn Fawn. This is their Gotta Have Gingham Rainbow Collection Pack. I'm going to use the pink pattern. And on my work surface here, I'm just putting the papers I've chosen underneath each die so I can sort of get an idea of what it looks like. For the solid heart panel, I've picked out some glitter paper from Simon Says Stamp. And then for the scallop frame, I'm using cotton candy cardstock from Simon. And for my greeting, I've decided to just use some solar white cardstock from Nina. So here are all my cardstocks and papers I've chosen, and I did a bunch of die cutting, including this one with the gold matte cardstock from Simon. And when you cut out this panel with all those hearts, you have lots of little heart extras that you can use later. So like I said, this greeting is sized perfectly for a box card. So I'm going to be adhering it just like that in a little bit, but for now, I'm going to prep all of these interior panels so that they're easier to work with and assemble everything later. So I'm reinforcing all of the score lines using my scoreboard. And I find that just right at 3 inches is perfect for this. So I'm lining up those straight edges on the side of my score buddy and then using the 3-inch mark for all of my scoring. Now, when it comes to scoring the panels for the outer area of the card, you're not going to be able to line them up just in those same spots. So you'll have to watch for where those score lines are and then line them up on your scoreboard accordingly. But you do want to reinforce all these score lines for the best result. So now it's time to add adhesive to all the tabs. So I'm using that same red line adhesive and putting the adhesive on all of the tabs that I've reinforced that score line on. So now before I start assembling, I'm going to glue my greeting onto the scalloped frame panel. And I'm going to hold it sort of in place where I want it, and then take my glue and just sneak the tip of the glue bottle underneath where the die words meet the edges, and just put a little dab of glue, just enough to hold things in place. It should be just fine. I'm going to press it down with my fingers and hold it in place until it's dry enough that I can lift up my fingers and the greeting will stay in place. So after I had that side done, I moved on to the other side, and I'm doing the same exact thing. I'm just slipping the edge of that glue bottle right underneath those words, just the very tip, putting a little dab of glue, and then holding it down with my fingertips. And this actually worked really, really well to get it to span that open space across this frame. So now that I have that glued, I can start assembling my basic box card. I'm going to first do the outside of the card. So I'm folding down all of those score lines, making sure I have a nice fold. And this, just like on the box card I showed earlier, this is going to help me assemble it and get everything in place without having to worry about folding things back. So I'm going to line up my panels and to make sure that they adhere just right. And I'm going to be folding down that tab onto the inside of the other piece. So I'm going to take the backing off the red line tape and line this up really carefully. And then I can just fold that tab over, and then I'm going to fold everything over in half just to test to make sure that everything lines up. So now I'm going to start working on the interior panels. The first one is this Love You So Much panel. I'm going to fold back those tabs just like I did before and get everything prepped. And then I'm going to start adhering, and I'm going to adhere these very similarly to how I did for the previous card. I'm going to take the release paper off one side, and I'm going to adhere it just to the side of that card there. So I'll peel up that release paper, and I'm going to hold it down, face down onto the card, just right over the front. And I'm going to line up the bottom of my panel with the bottom of the outside of the card, so it's nice and straight. And then I can press down that tab, and it lines up perfectly. I'm going to do the same thing for the outline heart panel. I'm going to peel up the release paper, and then I'm going to put it face down and have it just over maybe just not even quite half an inch. I have it over from that other one and lined up, making sure it's not popping out from the top or bottom of my card. And then for the solid heart panel, I will do the same. So for these heart panels, because the tabs aren't on the top and bottom of the card, you do have to kind of watch to make sure how you place them so that they're not too low and hanging out at the bottom of the card or too high. Because if they're exceeding past those edges, your card won't fit into an envelope. All right, so I'm going to fold these back to make sure they have some nice movement. And then I'm going to fold over the card and we'll be adhering to the other side. So I'm going to fold back these tabs one more time and release the release paper on the red line tape. And then I'm going to very, very carefully fold the other half of the card back, like fold it over. And I'm going to make sure that these tabs stay folded back. Sometimes they want to like pop open. So I'm going to do these one at a time and kind of peek underneath and make sure that those tabs stay folded back on themselves. And then once I have all three of those pressed, I'm going to open up the card and just test to make sure everything is working smoothly. Looks like everything looks great. You can see the dimension into the card. And the last step is to close it up completely with the outer edge. So I'm going to peel up that release paper and fold it over and tuck that tab just inside. This makes sure that everything comes together and is nice and straight. So here's my card. The last thing that I'm going to do is I want to think about where I'm going to have some white cardstock for to write the recipient a message. So I've actually used one of the frame dies from the basic box card set, and I cut down some white paper. I put some dot runner on the back, and then placed it directly on the very back panel of the card. I also grabbed a couple of those gold hearts that were cut out when I did the outline heart panel on the inside, and I just adhered those right there for some decoration. So that is the finished basic box card. I love how this one works, and you can fold down and slip right into an envelope. So those are the 5 different card shape ideas I have for you today. Just a reminder that all of the supplies I've used today are listed down below in the video description and also in the supply list at the Simon Says Stamp blog. Thanks so much for joining me today. Make sure you check out the other 5 ways and 5 days videos and the bonus videos for this weekend. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.